Hey, how's it going? My name's Jordan, and I'm really into the Ukrainian Russian conflict. I've noticed over the last year or so that the Trump administration has taken a very stupid posture towards Russia. This has served to misinform the public and obscure the fact that Russia is losing this war badly. By the end of this video, you'll see that nearly every action that the Trump administration has taken towards this conflict has been wrong. This is my first video essay. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. This will encourage me to make more videos in the future. Anyway, let's get started. If you've been following the US Russia negotiations about Ukraine, you might think that Russia is in a pretty decent position. The US has taken Russian demands seriously, and even things such as land concessions by Ukraine are on the table. But what if I told you that Russia is in a pretty poor position? In reality, Russia is entering its most precarious moment of the 21st century. Russia's full scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 unfolded very differently from what Putin had expected. The operation was planned as a rapid and decisive campaign that would capture eastern Ukraine in a clean sweep. Instead, it developed into a grinding stalemate that has imposed a staggering level of economic and diplomatic pressures on Russia. Russia expected a quick victory, and the continuation of this conflict threatens to collapse both their economy and their international posture. To understand how this all happened, it helps to compare Russia's original expectations to the realities that have emerged as this war has progressed. When Russian forces crossed into Ukraine, they did so with an inventory of over 15,000 armored vehicles, including tanks and armored personnel carriers. Planners in Moscow assumed that this strength would allow their forces to advance quickly into major cities and overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. They expected this to be a short, straightforward operation, but the reality was way different. The technology on the battlefield evolved rapidly. Heavy equipment like tanks have shown themselves to be vulnerable to unmanned, explosive drones. Early in the war, roads became choked with burned out hulls of Russian tanks, helicopters had to be pulled far from the front lines, and the Russian Black Sea Fleet decided to anchor itself, all because of the threat of Ukrainian drones. Of these challenges, the most significant for Russia was, and still is, their lack of armored vehicles in order to move their troops near the front lines. With armored losses mounting, Russia began pulling old, Soviet-era vehicles from storage. These have lacked modern electronic defenses, and so many of them have been fitted with defensive shells and nets. A desperate attempt by Russian troops on the battlefield to avoid becoming the next victims of Ukrainian drones. By now, armored vehicles have pretty much become too vulnerable to operate near the front lines at all. With armored vehicles failing, Russian units have begun to rely on motorcycles, random civilian trucks, and even long foot marches to get to the front. Broadly speaking, Ukraine holds steady defensive lines with minimal Russian advances. Territorial changes have been almost non-existent, in some areas advancing by only a few hundred meters per week. With Russian breakthroughs becoming nearly impossible, Ukraine is in no danger of losing territory by military means anytime soon. Putin understood that taking large parts of Ukraine would come with a significant economic cost, both from Western sanctions and from the war itself. Russia tried to prepare for this by building a large financial buffer, including $600 billion in foreign reserves. The idea was that after securing eastern Ukraine, this reserve would stabilize the economy, support military recruitment through higher pay, and subsidize key industries throughout the conflict. As the war has dragged on, the Russian economy has become strained to the point of breaking. A big problem that Russia has in particular is that it has been offering large sign-up bonuses and substantial death payments to encourage military enrollment. 3 years later and many troop casualties later, a significant share of Russia's wartime spending now goes towards supporting enormous military bonuses and death payments. While these costs have depleted Putin's piggy bank, an added strain on the economy is that every soldier that Putin pays to fight his war is one less worker in the Russian economy. As the saying goes, Russia is just one big gas station with a standing army. Russia relies on energy exports to fund its economy, and Europe has historically relied on this cheap Russian energy to survive. Though Putin expected strong economic pushback from the West, this symbiotic relationship between Russia and the European Union may have improved his expectations for the war. The Europeans have reduced their reliance on Russian energy by up to 90%. This is not something that Putin expected, and it's been devastating for his economy. With this disadvantaged position for Russia, the Asian markets such as China and India have been absolutely fleecing the Russian oil markets. These factors contribute to a ballooning Russian economy, one that's sure to burst sooner rather than later. With inflation at 20% and rising, the government has been forced to increase interest rates repeatedly just to keep everything from collapsing. Consumer prices have surged, every major industry is experiencing huge labor shortages, and businesses that depend on Western imports have been left scrambling to find low quality replacements from China. Instead of stabilizing, the Russian economy has been drifting towards a permanent wartime footing where more and more money is being spent on the military economy and less on the civilian economy. This is not the long term trajectory that Putin planned for. It's a profile of an economy that's overheating, losing workers, and becoming increasingly dependent on emergency spending to paper over deeper structural problems. Problems that are already spilling over into Russia's diplomatic posture. Russia's diplomatic situation has already shifted in ways that Putin did not expect. One of the core assumptions behind the invasion was that NATO would argue internally, hesitate, and ultimately struggle to commit meaningful support to Ukraine. Instead, the opposite happened. NATO became more unified, expanded its membership, and increased defense spending across the board. Western assistance for Ukraine has remained steady and far more coordinated than Russia had planned for. As Russia's war economy has started to buckle under the weight of inflation, manpower shortages, and massive wartime spending, its ability to project influence abroad has weakened along with it. A collapsing economic foundation limits Russia's diplomatic reach, especially in regions where Moscow once tried to present itself as a stable, great power partner. Russia's relationship with China has taken on an entirely different dynamic as well. Historically, China has viewed parts of the Russian Far East, especially regions in Siberia, as territories lost during periods of weakness. With Russia now economically strained and increasingly dependent on Chinese markets, loans, and energy purchases, Beijing's leverage has grown substantially. While China has no interest in provoking a crisis, a weakened Russia opens the door for gradual Chinese encroachment into Siberia through demographics, business influence, and long-term strategic positioning. This is the exact opposite of the strong European posture that Putin believed he would maintain. Western sanctions have pushed Russia into long-term diplomatic isolation. Key trade relationships have been severed, foreign investment has evaporated, and Russia has been redirected towards a set of smaller, less reliable trading partners. As the war continues to drag on longer and longer, the noose around Russia's neck becomes tighter. Instead of emerging from the conflict with a strong global position, Russia finds itself isolated, economically strained, and increasingly dependent on a China that now holds most of the leverage in their relationship. This is a reality far different from what Putin expected in 2022. Across the military, economic, and diplomatic fronts, the gap between Russia's expectations and the actual realities of the war have become too wide to reconcile. Taken together, these trends point towards a Russia with existential problems and a short lifespan. The situation Russia finds itself is being backed into a corner.